In 1775, 13 colonies in America revolted against British rule. However, Britain held on to 18 colonies on mainland North America. The Canadas, both west and east, remained loyal to Britain as well as Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. As for why they stayed, that's a whole other video that I'd totally be willing to make. But the other colony isn't in modern day Canada, but rather Florida. So that raises the pretty obvious question, why didn't Florida revolt as well? First, a little background. Britain had colonized the 13 colonies much earlier than they had Florida. Florida was not even relatively, but objectively new region to the British Empire by the time of the Revolution. When the battles of Lexington and Concord commenced, Florida had only been British for 12 years after winning the territory from Spain. Keep this in mind for later. This may seem like they should have hated Britain even more, but the whole point of a revolution wouldn't have made sense to the Floridians. The revolution had started because the colonials were tired of being too heavily taxed for too long without adequate representation in the British Parliament. Here births the line no taxation without representation, a policy that modern day America has seemed to abandon. The Stamp Act of 1765, the main cause of the revolution, hadn't affected Florida quite like it had affected the other colonies. The Stamp Act taxed American colonies. Very little trade came in through Florida, so they were unaffected by the Stamp Act and other British taxes imposed on the colonies that made big trading ports like New York and Boston upset. Thus, when the revolution broke out, Florida had no reason to revolt. They were living comfortable lives under British rule, and there was little reason to change that. Despite both East and West Florida being invited to the Continental Congress, both refused to send delegates because they were largely inhabited by Loyalist colonists. Why were they inhabited by Loyalists? Because they had just been won by Spain 12 years earlier. If you know anything about war and trying to keep territory as your land, you have to put your own people in that land so that you have a population loyal to your country. They weren't just going to win a colony and not put in as much effort as possible to maintain it with loyal subjects. Thus, Floridian residents were heavily opposed to any Floridian involvement in the war. Not that either the Eastern nor Floridian government had any wish to join, because they were run by loyalists in cushy government jobs thanks to the king. It just purely made no sense to revolt. This didn't now just mean that the revolting Americans weren't going to sit by while a potential state stays loyal. Americans weren't always stupid.
It's been all over the news. Trump tweets about it a lot. We want to know if Americans recognize it by its shape. This is it right here.
North Korea?
Continental forces attempted to invade East Florida early in the conflict, but they were defeated on the 17th of May, 1777, at the Battle of Thomas Creek, when American Colonel John Baker surrendered over to the British Army. Another American incursion into the same area was repelled at the Battle of Alligator Bridge on the 30th of June, 1778. So why did Florida decide to join America anyway? Well, they didn't really have a choice in the matter. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 ended the American Revolution in an American win, with Florida being ceded back to the Spanish Empire. In the 1820s, Americans were sent to repel First Nations all over the country. Future president, but at this time military leader, Andrew Jackson, was one of the main leaders of these charges. After the conclusion of the First Seminole War, Spain realized that holding onto control of Florida was too costly to maintain. The 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty transferred ownership of the colony from Spanish hands to American hands, as the treaty took effect on July 17, 1821. After then, Florida remained an American territory until March 3, 1845, when it was granted statehood. To summarize, Florida remained loyal to the monarchical cause because most Floridians were British and loyal to the monarchical cause as well. And they only switched over to America because Spain realized they didn't want to deal with First Nations. Stick around for next time when I go over how Georgia had the Confederate flag on their official state flag up until the very recent year of 2001.